with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human being. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well, now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you reside on this beautiful blue planet. Amongst others, off-world listening tonight, International Space Station, shout out. Those below the earth drilling the tunnels, shout out. It's all about where our world is moving to, seismically, volcanically, crop-wise, extreme weather-wise, governmental-wise. And you have to wonder why the world is the way it is right now. Do you think it's so insane because it's just people making bad choices? Or do you think the self-proclaimed elite understand the cycle is returned? ED, it's already restarted. We're now looking at the return of Valentina Zarkova coming out with her newest mathematical models, backing up. As soon as we descend down off of this solar peak here, we are absolutely into a grand solar minimum, which is now affecting crop production. And you start to see why now. The verifiable, documentable information to show that crops will be lost more and more and more from this point forward is the reason governments are establishing new protocols to control citizens across the planet. Just that simple. So Ransom Godwin with me tonight to discuss the issues. And as always, you know, Ransom puts pieces together that I miss, and between the two of us, we try to vacuum the room, get it all together. Bits of dust, dots unconnected. Somehow we're able to assemble them into something that makes a little more sense if you look at the world with a little bit different pair of eyes, shall we say. Ransom, thanks for joining me tonight.
How's
Thank
it
you
going,
on the
David?
call. Oh, there you are. Yeah, coming through loud and clear.
Yeah,
Five
I'm
by
here.
five.
I just I double muted myself there. I'm unmuted and muted at the same time. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm glad you said that. That's exactly kind of what I wanted to talk about is the measures that you see being placed down, so to speak, the bars on the planet. It's hard not to see them. I mean, we could go through several headlines like in a row that kind of, in my view, show you the way forward, or at least the elite's plan forward. But as we're seeing in China, to my surprise and excitement, actually, like when Hong Kong was protesting against China, it was hard for me not to get excited seeing, such a patriotic freedom movement. And you saw them, hoisting up American flags. That kind of touched home on the kind of America that I believe in, that fights for freedom wherever they need to do that. So, it's kind of sad to see that get crushed and disappear. And then now we skip forward to all of the craziness that we've seen under the Communist Party, and you've seen how many people are lashing back finally, which was to my surprise, because I was beginning to wonder if the population of China had been so browbeaten into submittance that there wasn't a point that they were going to fight back. I was really starting to be concerned about that as I looked at all of these quarantine camps being constructed. And I recently, like 2 days ago, got banned off of YouTube because I was showing, footage after footage of things going on, kind of with my own opinion of what I saw. And that opinion is that those people going to those little 5x8 prisons, I don't know exactly what's going on, because, you only get a little glimpse into it from the public, and then you get a spun version from the Chinese government, and somewhere in between there, you're supposed to figure out what's actually going on the ground. But when I see entire apartment complexes being emptied out, and then I see the people being hauled off somewhere, and I see all of their belongings being, kind of pushed in the middle of a parking lot and either set on fire or a bulldozer come and puts it in a truck. I'm starting to wonder if any of those people are coming back, and it's hard for me not to recognize a concentration camp when I see it, or the potential for one to be one. Now, I'm not accusing them of killing all the people over there. Like I said, I don't actually know what's going on, and we don't over here. But what I do know is that the Chinese population seems to, in part at least, have had enough with these rules. And according to the press right now, which I don't know is true anymore these days either, several of the cities have backed off some of their measures in response to the protests. Now, at the same time as I'm hearing that, I'm looking at footage of tanks rolling in, of anti-personnel, machines moving in to get in position to quell large-scale protests. And, when I see, massive amounts of people out there, especially young people, talking about free speech, talking about, ending the craziness that's the communist regime, saying to Xi Jinping to step down. And then over here in America, I see, these multi-billion-dollar companies like Amazon, shutting down their back door of how they're, getting some of that footage out and how they're communicating with each other. And then of course you have to look at the European Union people and the Americans. And as far as, world government goes, you see all of the players talking about how that is the idea that they want to take all of the other countries into a completely top down to the bottom, locked up world where they track and trace every single individual. And I'll get into kind of how bad that's going to be. And I don't think that America is really, or the Western world in general, is that far behind China. So it kind of excites me and maybe relieves me when I see people rising up in China, because I know, unfortunately, even though I'm excited about it and I feel real patriotic about it, the truth is, if they actually rise up, and there is some kind of organic revolution happen in China, I can potentially see millions and millions of people die over that. And at the same time, you have the Taiwan situation there, which, judging by history, would be intermingled in the movement, I would imagine, along with some other players around the world, trying to, promote that for those that are, competition to the Chinese as far as running the end result of this prison planet that we're going into. So I kind of wanted to show you these articles here, if I can get it to come up here.
Yeah, Ransom, could I jump in for a second there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I used to live and work in China, and I still have some contacts around in Asia over there. So the information is being smuggled out in memory sticks now, which is taking a little bit longer to get the videos out. And what they'll do is they'll bring them actually out some way, either pass them to somebody heading off on an airplane or a train, if they're going over into Hong Kong, or they're trying to get somebody into Korea. So here's the main sources that I've been following on Twitter for the last several days to see this. And right now there's 160 universities, 160 universities involved in this, in addition to all the people and whatnot. So if you're going to go to Twitter, as Ransom was referencing about the different videos that he was showing, at tanks rolling in, people just full out street battling with the police and whatnot. Jennifer Zung is a good one. It's JENNIFER ZENG 97 is her moniker on Twitter. And also, if you're going to hashtag China protests, that's with an S, China protests in Twitter. And also China uprising, hashtag China uprising is another good. These are just compilation sites where people are getting all the videos and putting them in the same place. And another one is hashtag China protests 2022. And then the next one would be hashtag A4 revolution, like an A4 size paper revolution. That's another compilation site that is putting some things there. And then hashtag lockdown, that'll bring you there. Any of the things like the Xi Jinping or the hashtag CCP, they're spamming it with a whole bunch of whatever in conjunction. So they'll put like 30, 40 messages within a minute, and then there'll be one video that you can maybe find. But it just takes way too long to go through some of these feeds for you to get that. So here's another one, hashtag blank paper revolution. So if you're looking for any information on Twitter, and then hashtag Urumuchi, that's URUMCI, Urumuchi. And thanks. That's all I wanted to say, Ransom. I'll continue on with your news stories there, but I just wanted to give you a few hashtags if anybody is out there and wants to dive on and look for some of the images and stories and things that are popping out of there. So yeah, please continue.
Right. Yeah. The blank paper revolution. Exactly. That's the name kind of given to it. And I see this going two different ways. I see the government striking back or pulling back. It can only really go, I guess, three ways. The government can pull back and allow the people to have some semblance or illusion of a little bit of freedom given back. That's usually how world governments do their thing, is they incrementalize it out. So they don't pull back all the way, but they pull back a little bit so it doesn't seem so bad to make people calm down. That's number one. Number two, the government completely cracks down in a wild manner, and we start to see, what we're already seeing is what I suspect are millions of people dying already. So China's kind of left in this position. Well, if they're backed in a corner, if they literally locked in a corner or locked in a building or locked in a little area or whatever you want to call it, they're at the point now where I think the third option is a grassroots revolution in China, an actual cultural revolution, not the one 70 years ago. But unfortunately, that involves millions of people dying as well. But they're dying at their own choice instead of being told where to go and when to go, so to speak. But kind of what I wanted to, cross that over to a little futuristic idea that I have of where this is going. If you remember the movie Johnny Mnemonic with what's his name?
Scissors Hands, right?
Yeah, no. The same guy from The Matrix. What's his name? Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
He played in he played in this movie called Johnny Mnemonic, where he went to China and picked up some information. He had to hide it inside of a chip inside of his head. That was, was completely had cryptic it was encrypted, excuse me. And the idea was that he would smuggle that over to the United States and give it to whoever it was, and all these people were after it. But now I skip you to reality. In 1 year, this is only 1 year after the scientific timeline in that movie of the way the world is, where it's falling apart. People are smuggling information, just like you said, on little data sticks and different stuff. The only difference is it's in their brain. And now we go to Elon Musk, Neuralink, about to start trials with humans in less than 6 months. And, and when we get into that, I just kind of want to show you the way it's going to go. So there's going to be a lot of people that deny this idea. They do not want a chip in their head. However, if it's the only way to sneak out information, like maybe protests in the streets or executions or concentration camps, the list could go on. And I'm being in a fictional place right now. Hopefully it stays there. But then you skip forward. Elon Musk wants to put these chips in human brains, right? This is also from MSN. Monkey see, monkey do. But when you look into the Neuralink test into the monkeys, the monkeys were going insane. They were chewing off their fingers. Horrible things were happening. Yet we're going to skip to the future. And then let me throw this little idea in here. The Vatican is buzzing with conspiracy theories because hackers take down the Pope's website. Now, keep that in mind about hacking, and then go back to the idea of having a chip in your head. Now, this is a article from the Washington Post, and it says Meta's new AI is skilled at a ruthless power-seeking game. And it goes on to talk about this invention that they made, this AI, where they set up a big scenario of governments negotiating, and the AI came out ahead of any human negotiator every single time. Now, when you think about this, think about that chip and the metaverse being linked right into your head, right? So the AI is already said to be, super powerful at this idea of negotiation and pushing its agenda, right? So, and then here, into the paddy wagon, Ireland imposes up to a 5-year prison term for quote-unquote hate speech. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about putting chips in people's minds and connecting them directly to the interface of the Meta, which is the nickname or future name of the new internet that they're creating. And then here's a new one right here. Pandemic stress literally causes teens' brains to age by several years. Now, I'm going to stop there with the sci-fi, but you can see all of these angles and factors weakening the human mind, and also the limitations of freedom in a traditional sense, in the ability to converse with other man and exchange information, whether it's just regular beneficial information, which could be farming, which could be, all kinds of techniques of construction. Now, keep in mind the reset. They're planning on resetting everything. So this will be your only option in this way, but they want to control it, and they already admit that the system can overpower the already weakened immune system, weakened mind, and then have a chip either, built inside of you via nanotech that they say doesn't exist. But that's getting back to circle around. That's exactly why they banned me off of YouTube the other day on my show. I was kind of showing how the entire human population is going extinct in the way that we've traditionally mated and created and procreated. Now they want to hijack that all the way from the genetic level all the way to a level of nanotech being able to decide which set of genes gets to mix with which set of genes. Now that is a super eugenic nightmare, or at least you would have thought so 20 years ago, but now it's a reality. And, when you combine all these sciences together, you can see that they are indeed culling, but they're not just culling. They want the survivors and the young people growing up to have a weak, feeble mind and also a weak, feeble body through being malnourished and having hunger problems, because they're going to retract the amount of, I'm going to call it freeness, but that includes everything: availability of information, availability of food, availability of travel, and free thought. And you can just see how they're trying to push this other civilization to be the top only civilization. Now, I hope that what's going on in China spreads to every nation on earth, and we start rejecting these transhuman eugenics ideas and go back to a coexistence with the earth, which has always been plentiful. If done right, in a peaceful situation, we can have abundance. But in order to do that, we have to have freedom. So it's not too late for us here in the Western world. We can start doing what China's doing now without waiting for giant camps to be built. I'll leave it there.
And while you do, Ransom, check your Skype. I sent you a bunch of images and videos that might be a little interesting to look through there. Now, staying on that, like I said in the beginning of the program here, I want to look at this with different set of eyes, different, lenses, for a better term. If you think about the global food shortages that are beginning to manifest right now, step back to the eruption that occurred in Tonga that blew the most water vapor into the atmosphere ever recorded. Now, apparently the water vapor reached 187,000 feet. in addition to the ash and the sulfur dioxide. Well, I've been doing an enormous amount of research in the southern hemisphere, and what I'm finding is the crops are not being planted because, at least in the southern oceans, from, say, southern Chile all the way down to Antarctica, and even parts of Tasmania down to Antarctica, it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the normal on the 30-year average. And plus the rains. And there's some areas also inland in Peru and Uruguay that are the same, 10 Fahrenheit under the normal, depending on the altitude and the crops being grown in that zones. Problem is, China gets an enormous amount of its grains from the southern part of our world. They are not going to be able to get enough food to feed the people. So if you start to look at it from a different lens, and you've seen those same images and movies of how they're feeding people in those quarantine camps. They've rationed their food down to like 1,500 or 1,200 calories per day as you see them throw the food in the window of like that plexiglass thing that you can, send meals in and out of. And I look at it and it's like squeezy cheese from a tube, sausages that are basically Spam wrapped in plastic. I've seen all this stuff myself when I lived over there and worked there. And just the most atrocious, 0 calorie or zero beneficial, zero nutrient kind of just pure white bleached bread. And that's all they're getting. They might be getting the calories, but there's really no minerals or vitamins or nutrition in that food. It's a food desert within the food they're giving. They're hollow calories, nothing. Hollow minerals, nothing. So you think about that. Currently, there's enough space for 100 million. So when you look at these pictures that Ransom's showing, and we've seen all those little cubicles, the 5x8 cubicles, there are 100 million of those built across China. They're putting them in the highways now, what we consider expressways. They know there's going to be no business moving through and things are shutting down. So they're constructing all these. You're like, well, where are they putting them? They're not even wasting the time to go plow a field flat out in the middle of cropland somewhere. They already have a ready-made foundation right there at the expressways that's 2 lanes wide. So if you look at some of these aerial images, you're seeing these camps extend down the highway for miles and miles. You can't even see the end of it. And we're up in a helicopter, some of these images, they got to be up a good 2,000-3,000 feet in the air. And they're looking down the highways. As far as you can see, it's just those white buildings, double stacked. As far as you can see, double lanes going back completely out of the distance. But if you look at it from the lens of food shortages, you start to see that they are force rationing the citizens' diets with an excuse as to why they need to force ration. Because China's in a pinch already. If you look at the reports of extreme weather that's happening with extreme freeze events in Heilongjiang and different places north, China's big freeze intensifies. Beijing's lowest November temperatures since 1970. And if you take a look at all these people that are still waiting in line to get their COVID tests, they're out in the middle of snow, freezing. Let me give you the temperature, 40 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, the temperatures they've already registered. And they have people out in Heilongjiang and these places going out in the middle of the day and standing there almost literally freezing to death, getting hypothermia to put these COVID restrictions in place. So in Xinjiang also, which is the same place that building burned that everybody was the catalyst to start all of what we're seeing in China. They're record-breaking 50 degrees Celsius below zero. And even in southern China and northern Vietnam, they're breaking all types of cold records. Now, I'd gone to a place called Sapa, which was north of Hanoi up there, and it had record snow back 2014, 15, 16. We're talking about North Vietnam getting feet of snow in the highlands. So I went up there and, hiked around a bit. It's a pretty cool spot. It's all terraced rice fields and whatnot. But places, they're looking... it's at Gunhe, new record, 35 Fahrenheit below zero. And Beijing went to 12.6 Fahrenheit. And they're having people try to stand outside for hours and hours and hours and do the testing and whatnot. But the cold wave that's sweeping across is interfering with the crop harvest, with the wheat harvest. Everywhere you look across the planet, I don't care what country you look at right now, is being greatly affected by the ash and the water vapor that has transited the equator And the latest data I have is July data of 2022. And I'm looking to see something at 10 hectopascals or 10 millibars in the atmosphere, which is it's above where the planes fly. And it's the highest measurements they have for wind flow around the planet. This is where they're measuring ejecta from the Tonga eruption already at 35 north. The latest data only extends until July. They are still masking and hiding the data, which makes sense. Because if it was like that, and if you just do a linear trend, so the eruption happened in January of 2015. If we come out to July, that's 6 months. So the ash and water vapor and sunlight blocking sulfur dioxide and all those particulates together, along with the geoengineering mixing into a soup in the sky, has gone from 20 degrees south latitude to 35 degrees north latitude in 6 months. So they're masking the data from all of August, all of September, all of October, all of November is not forthcoming. So if it went that far, it's already back up to the Arctic for sure, at least 60 degrees north. Because if it transited that much, 55 degrees in 6 months, then another 4 months, and then it takes us up to the Arctic Circle. So we are absolutely in the throes of a year without a summer. And I highly encourage everybody to read about the eruption that occurred in Tambora, and that's in the country Indonesia, in the year 1815. It took about a year, and the subsequent 1816 planting season in America, which, again, is how many miles away from Indonesia in latitude bands, changes in attitude, changes in latitude. They couldn't grow crops that year. It snowed like 8 inches July 1st in we're right around New York, New Hampshire. These areas they were getting feet of snow in July. So this would explain the biblical floods that we're seeing. They got 3 years worth of rain in Saudi Arabia in a single storm. Italy, it seems like the new benchmark for extreme weather is 1 inch per hour on the rainfall totals. Now we got this extreme cold record setting, and it's happening everywhere. You should see how many cold weather records have been broken in Canada already and the United States this early. Remember, just even a few weeks ago, how bone-chillingly cold it was for middle of November? Or has Goldfish Memories forgotten that already and re-brainwashed through the narrative of the mainstream media of how hot it is? Record-breaking cold in the first and second week of November. Those were January temperatures here in Tennessee. And we're starting to see it globally. They are in the throes right now of January, February winter temperatures at the lowest it would go in an entire year, just at the beginning of the winter season. This is affecting right now crop production globally. So if you're going to see how it dovetails into the China situation, the amount of calories on the planet will need to be controlled from this point forward. One thing about China is the way it's moving. If the army or police, whatever, starts shooting the citizens and they get that on film and it goes out to the rest of the world, there will be instant blowback. There will be instant anti-China protests, anti-China goods. Everything will be anti-China for some time, not forever, but it'll be like a flash in a powder keg. And you're going to watch the world shy away from anything ever made in China for months, if not a year. And all of these woke ESG companies that pride themselves on environmental governance and making the world a better place would be told by their shareholders to divest from China. We're an ESG. Our score, if you don't divest from China, our score is going to go down. So what you're going to watch is a complete hot potato dropping of all things financial of China, which will implode the world markets. Now, if that were to happen, they would bring in central bank digital currencies. And at the same time, you're going to get a digital rationing card with that. And the run has begun to ration all calories going into human mouths across all countries. Now, see, COVID, we got a little taste of that. You stand 6 feet apart outside a supermarket, and they will tell you when you're allowed in. This will occur again, but this time you'll have a digital rationing card, and there will be armed guards in these food distribution centers, and that will be coming to America also. It'll be many places first. So you will have some advanced warning that it's coming. So if you see that, where they start putting digital rationing cards and there's armed soldiers or police in supermarkets of at least 30 or 40 countries in the world, and you start to see that as a known thing, copy, paste, you should probably go out and stock up an enormous amount of food because it'll be coming here pretty soon. But the thing is, see, I don't know who's gaslighting who or where we sit on this. Perhaps China government knew it would finally come to this point where people would get so angry that eventually one day people would rise up. And they were counting on that to allow it to run to a certain point, to then start to shoot citizens, to then bring it to part two where everybody would throw away Chinese goods. They would have to divest, and it would cause the global cascade of financial ruin, which would then be the excuse to bring in the central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, because you cannot have the digital rationing card and the central bank digital currencies independent of each other. They're going to ride the same rail coming in. That's the whole point. So are we being gaslit, and was this allowed to take place, and conditions? Because, you know, Ransom, you hit on it. Like, this AI has hacked the human brain already. It understands stimulus response better than we as humans understand stimulus response in psychology after 150 years. So imagine if this is all being run by AI to put programs in place in China to get the citizens to exactly where we see them today. And they knew the onset would be approximately at the end of November or December. If you did this measure and that measure and you made it this difficult, people would lose hope. And when they lose nothing, they have nothing to lose, they lose it, as Gerald Celente says all the time. Run that forward, the AI would understand that the troops are going to fire on citizens eventually, and then the world's citizens will blow back. So, you know, as we sit right here, another thing to look for is if you do hear or see that the Chinese army had shot and killed a bunch of students or citizens that are protesting, you literally have days before the financial markets lock up. The very next day, finance markets would probably drop 10 or 20% globally as everybody exited all their Chinese holdings at the same time. Because you cannot tell me that you're misgendering somebody would be enough to start a war somewhere, and people are going to sit idly by while Chinese citizens protesting for freedom are going to get machine gunned down. And they're going to be okay with that? Well, if they are, then we're calling hypocrisy on the entire planet, and it's a bunch of BS anyway. How they are allowed to now say, yeah, go for it, protest, yeah, get out of the thumb of the CCP with the draconian restrictive orders from the COVID testing, yet they send in the army on the peaceful protesters in Canada and Australia and countless countries across Europe. And we see the same exact thing that they were doing in China just during our COVID lockdowns. It was okay to tase people and take them away and throw them in jail, remove their jobs, freeze their banking. And that was totally okay in the Western world here. And if you protested it, you were a conspiracy theorist, or you were a bad person because you didn't want to help the public. You didn't want to help the common good of the society. You're a bad person. Yeah, now it's okay. Yeah, protest. Oh, yeah, get your freedom back. Protest. So notice how everybody's distancing themselves politically from this one. But Ransom, I'm rambling, but yeah. So look for forced rationing, reduction of calories on the diet as food production globally ceases and decreases. The numbers I have so far are 50% reduction in global agriculture next year. I shouldn't say global, I should say Southern Hemisphere. They're going to know at the end of December, about 4 weeks from now, what they did plant or what they were not able to plant in the ground due to these abnormal cold and wet conditions that we're seeing across Southern Hemisphere. So if you see the citizens get shot, you know the global financial markets are going to collapse or go into a steep enough collapse to bring in central bank digital currencies. At least we have that forward to look, you know, hey, happy 2023. I'll pop the champagne.
Wow. You know, I was just thinking about that exact scenario. And would it really trigger the rest of the world? Because I'm watching these Chinese videos, you know, and they got the little bunny the bunny guys in their suits, right? And I'm watching them do
Stormtrooper.
really crazy. Yeah, they're doing really crazy stuff. Like, for example, bend someone over and take a test that didn't want to take it. I've seen them stomp people near to death, beating on people, stunning. You know, that's all basic stuff. But guess what? I saw that same stuff in Australia. I saw that same stuff in the UK. I see that stuff every day for different reasons here in the US. So we're kind of already there. The only thing we don't have, like I said, which is kind of embarrassing to me as an American, I was kind of embarrassed also, you know, with the Hong Kong thing, is to see other people with the idea of freedom and the idea of the whole real American dream to be free in other countries fighting for it. While here, we kind of just bow down and be like, okay, we'll wear a mask and, you know, okay, well, we'll just shut our business down because you said so. And then the idea to think that it's not a planned out reduction of food and society all around, it's kind of silly, especially when you see, you know, articles like this. Netherlands reportedly set to forcibly close 3,000 farms to comply with EU mandates for the environment, which is completely silly, right? And it's criminal. And the whole idea that the United States and Western powers are dumping billions upon billions of dollars into the breadbasket of Eurasia to stop the amount of food. I mean, it's kind of obvious to me because we've watched these destabilization programs over and over again with other countries, but this time it's in an area that makes a lot of food. And then you have the other areas that are making food. Well, we're just going to shut you down for the environment. And by the way, we're going to, you know, invite more people into your little town or village than actually live there now, totally overwhelming the infrastructure, the space, and completely dividing the people on Earth and putting them at people's throats. Now, over here, we got a more sophisticated psychological psyops going on completely, in which we're trying to make Americans hate Americans so that we constantly squabble over ideas that they gave us, arguments that they gave us, topics that they pick. Meanwhile, we should be arguing about more simplistic things like the ability to have our own energy, food, and freedom of travel. And it you know, it kind of corresponds to the way culture is going. You see all those, I'm going to say morons, that jump out on the highway and try to block the highway for, you know, whether it's they're fighting for the environment or climate change or oil or whatever it is. They are, in a sense, literally doing the same thing that I don't agree that the government does, which is set up checkpoints and kidnap me of my right to travel and my free, you know, will to pursue happiness, which doesn't include people stopping me on the internet or the interstate, excuse me, or any road and telling me that because of their cause, they're going to stop me. And then it makes me think of these bigger, you know, protests, I'm going to call them that are going on in China, and the fact that there really was a little hiccup over here in the Western world. You have Trudeau, you know, talking about how he idolizes Mao, he idolizes Xi Jinping, he loves the way that China works, and you know, and then we have the counterparts over here just trying to look the other way. The White House claiming, you know, they're not going to make an opinion about it, the same way they didn't with Hong Kong. But go Ukrainians. You know what? Ukrainians, every single Ukrainian child, mother and father needing, you know, a fully automatic actual assault rifle. And we're going to pay for that out of our money. Meanwhile, over here, we're going to shut everything down, all the power. And then I kind of wanted to get into the point that, you know, while they're planning all of this out in an obvious way to me, shutting down all of these, you know, ability to heat or feed your family in Europe, shutting off the, you know, right to travel whenever they want. They beta tested that. Now, when you look over there in China, I'm watching these little boxes, these little prison carts, and I'm still wondering where do they go after that? I haven't seen any stories, any videos talking about, well, you know, I just left the COVID camp. They finally let me out. I left the Foxconn plant, and, you know, I finally got out of quarantine, and I'm going home and reuniting with my loved ones. Where's those videos? I'm not seeing them. And that's concerning me. You know, I'm not saying I know what's going on afterwards, but I have a pretty good idea. And how long until we revert to 70 years ago when they did makeshift camps in China where they sent the political dissidents where one guy would hold a person's skull while another person put one round through it with the revolver. And they did that all day long. They did that all day long. Or you could take your pick, whatever your, slice of history you want to look at. You find the same things, uh, China, Russia, Germany. Now we got it more sophisticated where, I was talking about this also on my show. In Switzerland, they have the little suicide pod. In Canada, they're not going to pay for your drugs if you're not, and I'm counting people that are not even terminal, just people that have a disability that causes pain in their life. They would rather, give them a little assistance to turn themselves off. And I made this point on my show that got banned. And weirdly, YouTube reinstated it after I basically sent them a letter calling them a liar, saying I'm not showing anything that the mainstream media is not showing, and I'm not advocating for any violence, and I'm not claiming to give medical advice or any of that stuff. So they have no excuse to shut me down, yet they did. And I think the only reason they did that is because they're in bed with China, and I was showing how bad it looks and I was explaining why not here, because, people are like, wow, I can't believe those people bent that lady over and tested her against her will, which there's a name for that in Western civilization, and I think everywhere else in the world. It's rape. It's rape whenever the government or any other person makes you, take something in your body that you don't want to do, or takes part of your body away from you, or any of those scenarios. That is rape. And that's what's happening. And, people are like, wow, I can't believe that happened in China. In 2014, a guy in New Mexico was driving down the road and pulled in to get gas, and the local sheriff's department pulled up and decided that he puckered in the wrong way and proceeded to take him to a hospital that, the people there should have known that this is wrong and it's probably not legal without a court order, but they went ahead and, gave him a colonoscopy, basically to look around to see if he's hiding anything. And when that didn't work, they drove him out of their jurisdiction into another county where a second hospital agreed to the authoritarian, obviously illegal violation of this man's rights. This is in America. This is like 10 years ago almost. So if you think that one step away, it can't get that way here, you're mistaken. The only reason that it's not going on like what's going on in China, where there's people out there, throwing clubs and trash cans and whatever they could get a hold of, meat cleavers. It hasn't got that far yet. I actually saw a video where a guy said, no, I'm not going to your camp, basically. And he had a discussion with him with a meat cleaver. Who knows what happened to that guy? But over here, we have the Second Amendment. And they know that it ain't going to go down like that if they try to force it on us like that. But we're kind of dumb over here. Like I'm saying, they are literally talking people in the Western world into turning themselves off, which helps them with their agenda of depopulation. And also, I wanted to point out, you've been talking about these ration cards, and well, not to let the cat out of the bag, but I'm expecting a new one. And my girlfriend is got a little help because things are getting tight or whatever, and they sent her a little plastic temporary. I guess you'd call it a food stamp card. It's for food assistance. They sent her this little temporary one, and I was looking at that, and exactly what I thought in my head is there it is. There's the first incarnation of the actual temporary ration card, which they can up the number or down the number depending on your behavior. And, and not to beat a dead horse, but the system that the Chinese are using is already implemented here, or not implemented, that's the wrong word. It's already constructed here. It's just waiting for implementation. And the companies are trying to reroute the government and our rights by implementing them and claiming that they're private companies, which we all know what that is when the government becomes a merger with corporations. And that's fascism, that little word like everybody likes to call everybody. That's authoritarianism. That is totalitarianism. That is the idea that the Western powers say that they want to emulate in the Communist Chinese Party system, which is capitalist kind of communist society. And I'm saying no, and I'm really glad and I'm pumped, like I said, that there's so many people I've seen saying no, and most of them are young. Most of them, they're a new generation, and I think they're on a different level of the what do they call that cycle? When you go into fascism and then break free and go into freedom, and then everybody gets lethargic and goes back into fascism again. I think they're at a further or a different part of the cycle than we are over here. We're at the lethargic accepting stage. And until people's bellies are actually empty, I don't know if they'll really get what's going on, but it's obviously staged and planned according to these elites' own words. Like I just showed that article, they're going to criminally force farms to shut down so that they can't grow food. And then, of course, you got the war going on, and you got people over here destroying their crops and destroying the beef. All the prices are going up, and they incrementally go it up. I call it a Walmart style. If you've ever known what Walmart does is slowly they increase their prices all year. And then they have a rollback. They're rolling back prices, but they're not rolling them back to the original cheap price. They're rolling them back a little bit more expensive than that price. So they, too, get you incrementally with the food. And if you haven't been to the grocery store lately, it's like, $400 or $500 for three or 4 or 5 days of, eating like an American usually eats. But I suggest you stop doing that. And you go there and you start scoring these bulk things, dried beans, start freezing beef that you're not using, things like that. And then how long until we get to where we just can't eat that food because it's fake, it's beyond belief, or they're adding ingredients that we don't want that may or may not interact with our bodies in an unfavorable way. If you want to look into nanotech and spike proteins, I don't want to get too far into that because that's one of those no topics that the algorithm is already programmed to pick up. And then we get back to that. Who gave the algorithms the right to tell us what to think and when to think and how to think? But it's there. And according to the people in charge, they want to increase that power to this algorithm. I know that it's several different algorithms. I'm just kind of mushing it together as an idea. But what do you think? Me and you and people that listen are already kind of broken out of that mindset. So I know that we're preaching to the choir. So everybody that's listening needs to start hammering these ideas onto their relatives, like the common sense ideas of saving food, growing food, saving materials, screws, nails, all of this kind of stuff that you just can't go to the store and get if things shut down.
Well, I think you have to bring it down to something that everybody can relate to. And you just perfectly described that there with the fourth generation and the 4 generations of turnings, where one generation has to break free and get its freedom again, and that'll last for 20 years. And then you get into the upward economy and the hopefulness and the joyous phase where there's an enormous amount of prosperity for those 20 years. We're in the collapse phase now. So anybody who's alive is going to live through the collapse phase. Now, the younger generation, like you say, 2 generations below us or not, they're going to live through the collapse phase, and they're going to live through the rebuilding phase, and they'll also get to experience the golden phase. Because on average, not everybody lives to be 80 years old, but on average, 60. So most people will get to experience 3 of the 4 segments of the entire wheel of the fourth turning. We're now in the collapse phase. Okay, that's going to take 20 years. So those kids growing up through this time are either going to be born today and we'll just know it as daily life, or they're going to be like me and you, where we've seen several of the turnings already. We understand that prosperity thing back in the 90s. We understand the apex and the collapse phase here, 2010 onward. We get that. And now we're in the rapid descent to the bottom. And, we've seen these different segments of this turning already. So with the food, I remember my grandparents who lived through the Great Depression, how much it scarred them, changed them, and morphed their patterns. But see, it did affect everybody back then. The entire country and everybody in society was affected by it. But currently, they're not yet. So, like Ransom was saying, to go ahead and have conversations with people, they're going to be like, well, I don't care. I can just buy more expensive food. How do you get it through their head? At some point, we're not going to grow enough, and it's going to be rationed. So you won't be able to just go get what you want, because 40 or 50% of all small businesses and grocery stores were closed down during COVID and then never come back. So these options for you to run out to the local market to purchase some things, not there. And it's getting restricted more and more and more by day. I was looking here, 40% of all small businesses couldn't make the rent for last month. Like, if that's the situation of American small businesses, whoever barely scraped through and survived the COVID removal of small, medium-sized businesses, mom and pop, basically anything not corporate. Now those that did survive are at the point of like, wow, we can't even pay the rent. Not enough people are spending. People are pulling back. But how do you have that conversation to get somebody in the fold that it is affecting your life? You might not feel it directly. You might feel it indirectly. But the quality of life, if you have to really just measure it from 2019, is less for everybody on the planet. You're right. We can't travel. I still, go over to somewhere, like try to go to Croatia right now from America and see how easy that is compared to like 2018. You'd book a ticket, be on a plane and be like, hey, let's go crack a bottle of wine on the Adriatic Sea like that fast. Now, did you get your COVID test? Did you do this? Did you get swabbed? Did you do that? Okay, wait, got to stay in a disinfected hotel still? Because EU restrictions are way different than they are here in the U.S. At some point, it's going to affect everybody, but how do you get that realization? Okay, it's the tidal wave's coming. It's like if you saw the tsunami and after the earthquake, there were a lot of people in Thailand up on the hills going, get off the beach, we can see the wave coming. It wasn't pertinent for them because they didn't see the water coming. All they knew was there was a lot of people yelling. And then at what point did it become a life or death situation where people's whatever turned on immediately? Well, it's the same thing with these inbound food shortages and more control in the digital rationing cards and how you're going to be allowed to spend your money and how it will be tracked or turned off or programmable. This programmable money with these central bank digital currencies inbound means that they can put an inflation rate in it. So after 3 months, it's worth 0. So you have to spend it in a certain amount of time. If the economy is sagging, they say, okay, you have to spend what we deposited into your wallet within the first 7 days or else it goes to 0. Almost all money in the entire country would be spent in those 7 days, and they could artificially prop the economy and go, look how good it's doing. And they can tweak and morph the economy. And I saw, who was it up at the World Bank just this morning? This is off Zero Hedge, talking about we needed to do a service to the world to continue to raise interest rates to pull down inflation. I'm like, whoa. Let's rephrase that into English. Every time a central bank raises interest rates, they're stealing that amount of percent of your purchasing power out of your pocket by debasing currency. So if they want to bring the inflation rate up to 4%, that means they've just amped it up from stealing 2% of your money per year on a 2% rate, which has been the average in America, to 4%. So what is it now that they need to steal all the extra money from everybody globally? Are they in a rush to get extra funds? Raising taxes isn't enough. So they need to raise interest rates to steal even more of the purchasing power of your dollar. Like that's happening now. And it's difficult to break through the narratives and the conditioning of the average person who just goes, well, it's not so bad. We don't have to wear a mask anymore. Things are getting back to good again. No, my friend, you really didn't pull the curtain back and see what monster lies behind there. They just closed the curtain. That's all. Just like in China, a lot of these big cities are removing their COVID restrictions just to try to stop the riots. And Ransom, I sent you a few more links here. This one over at hashtag China Uprising. They are now burning the quarantine camps. They're setting them on fire. And that would be in Lanzhou, which is way out west, north of Chengdu and north of Sichuan province. And I sent you a few armies moving in videos because it seems like they are sending the army in now to try to tackle with the people. Oh, I'm sorry. It was in Lanzhou City in Gansu. Yeah, that's still out west, out there north of Sichuan province. Gansu, Ningxia. And then you got Urumqi and that whole Xinjiang area out west in the desert, which, by the way, I know I'm rambling. Last thought here. You mentioned these countries that are going into or being controlled that could grow more food. If you go on the border with China out there at where all these Muslim protests are happening and the people being rounded up in the camps out there, millions of the Uyghurs, that border out there touches a country called Kazakhstan. It was in the top 10 exporters for wheat, and they had a full banking crisis that crushed any ability for them to import fertilizers and this sort of thing. So if you go to Kazakhstan, look for bank uprising, bank riots. They're also not anywhere close to what their normal exports are for wheat or what the normal planting was for wheat. And if you look at Myanmar, again, a place I did work and did business out of there, I exported coffee. That's how I started this whole Adapt 2030 channel. They're only using 50% of their available arable land. They could grow more. And Venezuela also, huge breadbasket. Used to be the breadbasket of South America, totally offline for now. But then when they bring it back online, who's going to get the spoils out of that? When they bring Myanmar back online, who's going to get the food production out of that? When they bring Kazakhstan and Ukraine back on as the breadbaskets of the world, as Canada goes offline, and parts of China go offline, and Australia goes offline, and parts of Chile and Peru go offline, and parts of Brazil because it's too cold in the southern hemisphere, who's going to get the spoils of those countries that are riding the equator? I'm telling you, it's all related. You can't say with a straight face that they're closing down 3,000 farms in the Netherlands when we're going into a global food shortage, and they're having wars in the biggest breadbaskets of the planet. Now, if you can't see that this is all planned to reduce food production and get us into this, we can't grow enough to feed the planet, to get us into this digital rationing card and get you on the digital system, you just aren't looking deep enough because it's all connected. This whole
program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
And welcome back for the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. David DuByne here with Ransom Godwin. We're talking about food and why the production of food is happening across the planet when we're going into higher food prices and food shortages and food unavailability, which will result in rationing and digital rationing cards, along with central bank digital currency. And I was laughing for a second when I was getting a bit of cheese out there for the break. As we record the show tonight, if I was going to edit that to then make it into a podcast, which I could put on YouTube, I would have about 10 minutes of conversation, maybe 12 out of that last hour that we spoke, because it would be censored, or they would flag my channel, or it would be, they wouldn't let me upload it, or there would be some anomaly, let's say, with the information being presented. Now, if I just did a regular podcast, absolutely, it could go out as such on Libsyn or any of the other, where you listen to podcasts. That's when it gets interesting. So thank you, Revolution Radio, for allowing us to have these types of conversations without having to really backtrack our speech. Edit the soundtrack, which seems to be happening a lot these days. So please consider a donation, Revolution Radio. And all of you out, Rumble, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, listening to us live along with the Mini Ice Age Conversation channel, Ransom's Mountain High TV channel. Vigilante TV crew, welcome. Think about leaving a comment so we could answer some of your questions as we're looking through the comment section this evening in this second hour. So, Ransom, I left off right when I was talking. These countries that could increase food production, excuse me, the ones that we know now, Kazakhstan, Myanmar, Ukraine, Venezuela, politically completely unstable. But then you look at where could be new food growing zones that are starting to show promise, like all of the Sahel and all of the northern African countries. There's a lot more rainfall above ground now with the change in what we're seeing as jet streams, and cloud cells. And if you look at Gaddafi, which he was able to drill into the Nubian sandstone aquifer and create lakes in the deserts, and what did he have, 100,000 acres of sorghum and different test plots of wheat. What else were they doing? The sunflower out in the desert. And they had this massive pipeline, not for oil, but for water delivery out into what was 6,000 years ago, the floodplains or the deltas. Now, take those two things into consideration, the above ground rainfall increasing to the point it is turning the deserts green. I encourage you, anybody go over to NASA Space Observer in the World View, and then go into the World View map viewer there and go back to like 2015 or 16, and you can get, there's a plant indice overlay there, a different layer of plant chlorophyll. So you can see the greens popping in and out. Just turn on that layer and then go back to 2016 and then turn the layer on now. It is way, way greener. But then you tap the water underground and see, I know Gaddafi wanted to go to a gold-backed dinar and sell food, oil, and their finished products in any fiat currency as well as any precious metal accepted. But that included oil. Americans couldn't have that. So what did? We went and bombed their water pipeline infrastructure that was set to take water out to the deserts and turn Libya into a new powerhouse of crop production in North Africa. So if we're losing all the crops, and after this chaos phase finishes and we descend to the bottom and we crash onto the bottom, I am also lightly forecasting that to start the world economy again, the focus will be on putting out the Sahel in North Africa, all the infrastructure to turn it into the world's largest grain basket. But at the same time, the centralized control with that grain basket, because eventually they'll just say, no, it's too inconvenient to send the fertilizers back to Canada or America. We'll just grow it all right here. Double rotation crop. It's bigger than Canada and the United States combined anyway. So we don't need all these extra perfect countries producing food. You see what problem it caused us last time. We need to centralize production. And if they did it in Africa, then again, you come back to the centralized digital rationing cards, central bank digital currency, centralization of all finance. And then if it plays out after the crash, this would be some 10 to 15 years from now, full global food production would exist in Northern Africa and the Sahel all the way down to the equator. And that's the only place the food would come from on mass scale for grains. Now imagine who controls that, controls the planet for sure. So Ransom, I don't know what you think about this. Why do you think they're knocking out the food production across the planet? Everywhere you look, it's just more reduction, more processing reductions, more, this ability to get even the farm inputs to the farmers to be able to even get it out into the fields to even process it and grow. I don't know. I mean, are we being invaded right now? Is there some other force outside of our planet that's inbound that has taken over, or is this a dimensional thing, or is it human against human, or is it just evil versus dark, or light and dark, and what was been foretold in many a legend and prophecy across the ages? I don't know, man. It makes very little sense to me right now. Food shortage is inbound, but they want to cut off the food even further.
I think it's kind of what you touched on a minute ago, that they know that their entire story is crumbling. Whether it be global sea ice, glaciers that are reforming in different places, or the fact that the planet, it's just been getting greener. What you were talking about earlier, what's greener mean? It means, well, a lot more stuff is growing, which part of that, or should be, a lot of part of what's becoming green should be food. And they kind of know this. That's why they're trying to shut down and cut down everything. So the whole idea, would you, 20 years ago, think that part of the global warming story would be, hey, we're going to cut down this forest over here so we can make some wood pellets to cut down on carbon dioxide. When the trees cut down on carbon dioxide, a greener planet means there's more vegetation worldwide sucking up CO2. And I actually just read a paper recently that kind of proves that the amount of greening offsets any man-made global accumulation of carbon dioxide. So, that's very inconvenient, so to speak, for them. And then at the same time, I'll show you an article here that talks about doom and gloom in Colorado because of the drought. But what they're not telling people is look at the amount of probable snowpack that's going to continue, for the next several winters. And guess what happens when snowpack starts accumulating from season to season? Well, all of a sudden you got a bunch of water frozen again, and then it comes down the mountain, and then there's no drought. So that they know these little cycles are going to kind of heal themselves. They're going to change inevitably in different places where it'll be no longer available to, so to speak, grow stuff there. Not so to speak. I mean, it'll be hard to grow stuff in new places, and other places are greening, and they know that. And they know that certain areas, they've contaminated the water through fracking and drilling out natural resources, that they, at the same time, they're trying to tell you that we need to stop, pumping stuff and using petroleum and whatever. At the same time, they're allowing, fracking to go on in the wrong way. There's nothing wrong with that type of energy. It's just kind of the way that they're getting it out of the ground. And, if you wanted to just do an experiment and kind of foretell the future of at least the Permian Basin, that's near where I live. So that's a little bit out east in eastern New Mexico, western Texas. There's a giant aquifer, the artesian, Permian aquifer there. The entire area, because no one lives there, it's pretty harsh desert out there. There's fracking everywhere. It looks like a virus on the planet. But if you look a little bit closer, there's something else cool there. there's a big swath in between every fracking zone of food that they're growing. So it's fracking, food, fracking. If you look at the map there, so they have all of this food in between the fracking that's dirtying the water table, so to speak. And then there's other places that are just straight collapsing. There's a small town in Texas that's just collapsing. It's caving in. It's going back into the earth because all of the pressure and channels underneath it that held it up. They fracked everything out of it and they rearranged the water table and stuff. So things are settling. And then when you add the fact that we may be going into a planetary a difference in the way things have been going on for the last 5,000 years as far as weather-wise. And then just look back in any past. And ironically, I'm going to get to go see Chichen Itza in the Yucatan Peninsula. And we know that that's a jungle area right now. There's cities covered in jungle. But at one time, there had to have been farming for millions and millions of people. And something happened and that farming stopped and they all of their civilizations collapsed. So if we're at a point in time now in the future when civilization is purposely collapsing their infrastructure as far as food production, necessarily the population is going to reduce, just like it has in any other empire that had, famine, pestilence, or war. The people go down, and it's so funny that it seems like maybe that's why there's a coordinated effort to stop people from farming. Is that exactly what you touched on? That the planet is going into another phase. It's greening in areas. It may be freezing in areas. You were talking about that earlier about these extreme temperatures. We're just going back into the normal phase of slide down. The glacial period is over. I mean, that's what we've been watching for our entire history is the melting. So I'm not worried about no super floods, like the kind in the Bible, the Great Deluge. There's not packed ice enough to ever worry about stuff like that. You have to worry about superstorms now, flooding out a smaller localized area and just completely decimating that and them trying to grow food. So I think that the key to the near future really is to plan out for your family, not just you. And I kind of get irritated at some people that are like, well, you're talking about all this collapse and you point out all this stuff. And they seem to forget that I also mentioned that these plans are incremental. Meaning they're not going to just all happen. They might happen, if we have a big enough disaster worldwide, like you were talking about China shutting down their economy. That would be a man-made disaster that could, speed things up. But over time, it's incremental. And you could just see in 10 years, if you look back 10 years, how much it's changed. Now imagine the fads and the direction of the governments and just add 10 years onto that. And you can see that we're talking about our children and grandchildren's future, just like yours. And, not to get woo-woo, but it does seem like somebody, somewhere of some kind has a plan that takes a lot longer than a human lifespan. And that's the only explanation, in my view, that I can figure out why these elite families continue to plan on generationally, hundreds of years generationally. Think about all the transhuman writings that were coming out in the 20s and all of that stuff that they were writing. It's all come true. They knew which direction it was going. They had some kind of information source, whether it just came straight out of what people call the ether or what I call it's like another dimension of thought. You ever think about that? You pull those thoughts into our reality. It's been happening throughout human history. So, every time someone invents something, they just pull this idea out of their head and they bring it into our realm of 3D reality, of physical universe, and they manifest it and it becomes part of our reality. But the question is that also happening again as a new renaissance of human beings? Because I've been pointing out that I think we are the people that are adults, and some of the children in Generation Z are really the last generational real human beings before some of these programs have irrevocably changed the human being into where we're a new species. And I think we're just going into two different species because there's groups that have seen this coming. They haven't participated in it. They've kept a natural living. And it's anecdotal and funny, but I'm sure you've probably seen this on Twitter or Facebook or somewhere. It's becoming a fad now for women to hide their vaccination status. Because they don't want men to know that they've done that because they're worried about the guy worrying about them being infertile. And the same thing's happening in reverse where women are looking for certain types of people that haven't participated in some of these gene altering programs. And people forget, even if there wasn't a master plan, so to speak, to change your DNA, viruses naturally change your DNA. And, they put a little marker on your DNA, and all of your children and grandchildren from then on are all going to have that mark of that battle. And it may be an upload, actually, an upload of genetic information. I don't know about you, not to sidetrack, but have you ever thought about the idea of a virus? It's not a complete organism. However, it has a function and a specific program. And it needs to interact with the living cell to complete that program, which means that somebody somewhere, in my opinion, programmed it. Or are they trying to tell me that, viruses, they're just floating around and life evolves, and then all of a sudden we're being attacked by these viruses that aren't complete organisms? Instead, it makes more sense like they're uploads. They're little bits of information that species need to increase their immune system and continue on to the future. And they put that marker on their children, making those children have the right to live in the world we exist. Now, they're hijacking this idea with new forms and stuff, but all of that is putting a mark on your DNA, and that's not even in conjunction with the food. So let's circle back to the food shortage. They're coming out with all these products to supplement the shortage of real food. The bugs is one thing. They're starting to put that in there. They're showing up on the grocery stores now, almost as fast as we told you they were going to do it. And then you also have the, genetically modified or gene edited foods, and they're replacing it. So now we have lab grown meat, fake vegetables, fake meat. And this is the idea that they're going to bring forward is this product to supplement real food and real nutrition. So you can see right there, another split in the species, people that are eating real food versus people that are eating engineered food. And then you get into the topic of epigenetics, right? Everything that you come in contact with in the environment is turning on or off some gene to do a certain thing. And it seems like a lot of people are getting cancer now, but ironically, they're offering a pill now that's supposed to get rid of that. And they have all these new nanotechnologies to cure that. And it makes you wonder, is the whole idea that they're trying to get to is this 500 million people that they had on, the Georgia Guidestones. It seems to me that they destroyed that statue along with a lot of other statues in recent times as part of the Great Reset. Because I can see a time in the future where there is a Chinese-like communist government in all places in the world where they are checking people and their apps on their phone and what software they have, what data they have, and there ain't going to be any available books that are talking about certain topics, or there's not going to be statues that proves that these bad things happened in the past, this democide by government. And then, of course, we have now, which is a bunch of people distracted with drama, fictional, stories, fake emotions for fake subjects and fake people. So they really have a grasp and a control on the entire population when it comes to their mental state. And now they're going to replace their food with fake food and at the same time reduce it. So I could see people sitting back and saying, well, I live in Georgia, I live in Texas, that's not going to affect me. But let's get real. Not really that many people grow and eat all of their own food. Not really. Even people that are into that and know how to do it aren't really eating that. They're still supplementing with the grocery stores. And so I wanted to get into this topic and ask you a question. Meanwhile, with all this other stuff we're talking about, I have noticed that everywhere I go, in every city, and I'm talking about a small city to a major metropolis city, there are so many homeless people outside. There's homeless people all over the place, California to, Philadelphia. And I was thinking the other day, if you've ever watched that show, The Walking Dead, and they have that little preview at the beginning with the crazy music, and they show all the post-civilization scenes, you could cut what's going on in the news right now. Throw a little China, throw a little Ukraine, throw a little homeless, throw a little drug addicts, throw a little bit of these I guess you could call them campfires, like the link you sent me. And I was really thinking that how long is it going to be until people realize that they could just go burn these places down before any people get put in them? And then also remember, a few years back, FEMA built giant prisons here in the United States. I know nobody wants to talk about that, but they did indeed. You could look it up. They did. and they hired people to man those prisons. There's nobody in it as far as I know, but they did build them. There's one in Alaska. There's one in California. They're building one in Fort Bliss. And the one in Fort Bliss they're using to bring in people from across the border and help them get further in. So obviously there's a rearranging of the pieces on the map right now. And part of that is to cause starvation in a slow pace. So what you're fighting for when you start prepping and realizing all these ideas are your children and your grandchildren are going to be affected by every decision we make, from the people in the streets in China to you at your house growing vegetables out in your yard, setting an example for your neighbors.
Man, that's the whole thing. The slow creep. That's why you get the fatigue. Some people have it green fatigue if they're battling in the whole global warming thing. Imagine you started really getting on it and trying to change your light bulb to a curly Q light bulb back in the 1990s because you were battling the climate. And you've been in that for so long, and then you just see things get progressively worse, even though there's supposed to be more and more people, trying to improve environmental conditions, quote unquote. Governments are in on it, international bodies are in on it, investors are in on it, but things just keep going off the rails. So at some point they get what's called green fatigue, or they're like, why even bother? It's gotten 10, 20 times worse than when I was a kid in the 1990s. What's going on? It's supposed to be better after 30 years. Getting way, there's too many people. Oh no, it's the way that we use antique clunky systems that need to burn oils and things when we could be using magnetic motors powered by the Earth's magnetic field, where we don't need to burn a single thing. You have a magnetic field pushing the disks as the magnets rotate and push off of each other. As a kid, I'm sure you played with magnets on your desk in school. You put them, and then you put them close, the stronger ones, and boom, they push away from each other. Now put the positive and negative on a disc on each side, and then let it spin. It'll just keep moving the discs, depending on how the magnet's oriented. You need 36 or 37 degrees of tilt on those magnets to make them push and have enough push to break the magnetic bond to move it to the next. And then sometimes you have to substitute. It's just like a flywheel, if it'll go for a while and then it'll slow. But if you juice it a little bit and add that impetus back in, you can get that flywheel effect cranking again. And then the magnetic bonds between those magnets will continue to break faster. It'll slow down. But it just takes a little bit of, it's not perpetual motion indefinitely forever. You turn it on and ever. But you're going to have to modulate it a sliver, really talking like not even 1% of all the electricity generated, to then push that back in to get the wheels to spin back to optimum again. 1,200 RPMs or so, 1,400 on some. Why is that not being implemented right now and used across the world? 8 billion people is too much for the clunky way we do it, where we burn stuff and we have to rip the earth apart with mining for minerals and trying to separate what we consider dirt. And you need to take the metal out of the dirt and then turn it into something steel, so then it can be made in China for a bit of junk sent across the ocean in a container for you to get it. Because what's so quirky is this whole, remember the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, buy 2, buy 3, they're all on sale, get 2, get extra, everything's on sale. And then the very next news article is global warming. You're at fault. You're global warming. You humans are the ones who did it. No. Wait a second. You told me to buy 2 because they're on sale, bits of junk from China on the day after Thanksgiving. And now you're yapping on about, too much emissions in the atmosphere. Huh? I don't get that. You see the duality of it. Because I'm not the one digging the earth out there and smelting and using gigawatts of power to have enough heat so I can take the earth and melt it apart and then separate the metal from the dirt. Like, that's not me. I appreciate the stuff that it could be done in a way different way. Incredibly different ways, where we don't have to burn anything to do that. And using frequencies, you can separate soils. Like using sound frequencies, you can break algae apart to separate the oil from the green matter. Before they used to squeeze it, and some of the algae that were rounder, shaped like eggs, like Botryochus, had a very difficult time getting a high yield off of. Like the algae that you would grow in a raceway pond is a single species. Algae biodiesel. And then somebody came up with a great idea that said, hey, it's a cell. We could rupture it in water and we would get 100%. And the oil would float to the top of the water and the green stuff would float to the bottom. And you could separate the animal feed off the bottom, and then you could get the oil specifically at 100% and do a little agitation. Run it through a filter, and then you got your pure oil, pure algae oil, which again, when you think about growing algae, it's the most plentiful, most fastest replicating, fastest growing plant on the planet, hands down. Nothing even compares to algae. Nothing. Moringa, forget it. Some of these fast growing plants, bamboo, not even a tortoise, like a slug in the middle of the desert. That's how slow bamboo grows in comparison to how fast algae grows. And we didn't decide to use any of that. Those technologies have been around for 25 plus years. And we're still digging oil from the ground. We're still digging minerals from the ground. Yet we're the ones supposed to be responsible for it. How about those that have censored the technologies that should have been forthcoming for at least the last 80 years? I mean, some of those Tesla patents, which I'm referencing you, that I saw in Zagreb in the Nikola Tesla laboratory in downtown Zagreb, functioning, working models of spinning rotational opposite disks. There were 14 working models in that museum. Patents from the 1880s, 1887, 1888, 1903, 1907. None of those patents were improved on for this last 100 plus years when we had a free magnetic field from the Earth to work with. And suddenly the same nefarious powers are coming in to tell us, oh, there's food shortages now. We can't get you anything. We had a smooth, harmonious running. Oh, speaking of the harmonious society in China, we had a harmonious running society where everything was delivered. Industry and titans delivered everything you need for 100 plus years, smooth as silk. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, we hit a brick wall this year. Oh, wait, the onset of the grand solar minimum is right now also. That's quirky. And suddenly their working system, because I'm up here I'm looking at some sunspot imagery right now. Now we should be at solar maximum this year, and going into the end of this year through the first 3 months of next year should be solar maximum. Now some would disagree and say it's the end of 2024. But if you're looking at a very weak cycle, then you would expect it to come a year early. But let's play devil's advocate, and we are coming into solar maximum, and we should be, let's say, from this year through the next 2 years at massive solar output. Where you look at the sun and it's just dot, 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 tons of dots connecting. Magnetic fields, you're getting solar flares, you're getting CMEs, there's so much magnetic activity that the entire sun is covered with what you consider dots that are sunspots. As we look today, there's one sunspot on the sun. One. 3152. It's in the top right, 2 o'clock position. There should be 50 or 70 sunspots at the minimum on this going into solar maximum. And we sit here with one. This cycle was forecast, and Valentina Zarkova, if I could come back there, she just put out a new video and had more data and research and came back with even better modeling than they have when she was removed from the net for giving you this very same information, 2015, 16. Like the powers that be knew this cycle was here. So all the well-oiled, smooth machinery of all delivery and everything that got us to this point that was functional. Remember 2019 when you could travel using Airbnb and Uber and all these different things? You rock up in any country, there was an app for getting something similar to an Uber. Every country had Airbnb, but there were also local, similar in every single country that you could possibly visit. And then how many sites were there where you could get a super cheap airfare? Going from that to complete lockdowns and going from the most bountiful agriculture where, nobody wanted for anything. We hadn't heard about famines in Africa since Sally Struthers back in the 1980s asking you for $1 a day to feed some kid. There might have been the random war that stopped little food in Africa, and that was it. But for those 30 years or whatever, 40 years, there just haven't been the mass famines except here and there. There's never been a global one. It's always a regional one in a single country or a tiny bit. And it was always usually in Africa, always in Northern Africa, always Sudan, always Ethiopia. But what's crazy is that new Renaissance dam that they built in Ethiopia / Eritrea, those countries separated in civil war. Africa's largest hydroelectric dam in the driest place in Africa, yet it filled in 2 years. And they just completed construction on it last year. And suddenly it's full. I'm sorry, it was 2 years ago. And yeah, it's full already. Had my math back. It completed it in 2020. It's supposed to take 7 years to fill, and it's already completely full. To the point they're generating electricity. Now, who knew these cycles are inbound? See, that's what I'm saying. Everything is overlapping at this time. And this thing about the trees, this is the last thing I'll say, Ransom, because I'm rambling again. I do sometimes. The trees, we're taught, don't plant any trees to offset CO2. You pay a carbon tax, and then the government pays somebody to build a machine that will then bring the CO2 and put it underground. Fake trees, for a better term. CO2 sequestration. That's insane. Why don't we plant more trees? But 5G signal interfered with trees. So have you noticed the deforestation of most cities across the planet? I'm not talking about the deforestation in places like Amazon or whatnot. I'm very cleanly pointing to say deforestation of all cities across the planet in unison, because those trees in the downtown middle of Downtown Square Park interfered with 5G moving through the city. And especially wet leaves will block 5G signal. So I would encourage anybody out there to take photos of, say, 2013 is probably a good time to start. 2012, 13, 14 of your city block or a city block in a city and compare it with 2022. And then look at the spike in temperatures that would create because the albedo effect, the trees absorbing and keeping that sunlight directly off the pavement or the asphalt below. Now that all those trees are gone, there's way more radiation striking those concrete and asphalt surfaces, along with tires in cars and building sides and bricks absorbing the heat off of that. And the cities are radiating more heat out because they cut the trees down. And then they can claim it's global warming because the cities are getting hotter. Well, reverse that back. You cut down all the trees, and you'll notice that, say, 2010 temperature uptick that you see on the charts measuring global temperatures. Dr. Roy Spencer came out with the new temperatures today, by the way. And we're supposed to be blamed for them cutting down all the trees, or these city officials to pass legislation or pass resolutions, whatever, where they can cut down all the trees in the city because the 5G company's coming to put stuff in and everybody's going to get money for approving the permits. But all the trees need to go in your city. And they did it slow creep style too. Like they didn't walk through every day and just rip the entire treescape down from cities in one single day. They went with the installation of the towers. So as the installation of the towers went through, so did the large trees. Now they might not have cut down 100%, but they did in some cities. You go down an entire city block, they cut it completely down to the ground. Not even one 50 or 80-year-old oak tree left on the entire block. They cut them all down, like 50, 100 of them in the UK in a single day, just down to one whole street. You go to work in the morning, you come home, your entire street that was covered in lush vegetation, large trees, shade is gone in a single morning when you went to work. That kind of extreme into there's very few large trees left in any cities. And if you notice it, the trees are always small and they're only in a couple locations, but everywhere else there's very few trees in any cities when it used to be trees on every single sidewalk. And see, Ransom, I'll leave it back to you there, but all these things that have been put in play to try to give the excuse that humanity is the problem is truly the corporations themselves that are the problem, trying to blame somebody else for the problem.
Let me guess, this is just me theorizing here, but you have all of these cities doing this, cutting it down so that people could get better 5G in their neighborhood. What do you think the temperature does when you cut down all the trees inside the middle of a city, and then they pop up these thermometers and say, look, it's global warming because it's so hot in the city? It's like whenever they put those thermostats at the airport, they'll put them like in the middle of, out here, they've been putting them in those desert, solar panel fields, which is obviously much hotter and gets much hotter than the surrounding area because those panels are black and it's in the sun. And we're in the desert. So, yeah, of course, it's going to get super hot around those things. And it's weird that new ecosystems are forming. I looked at an article the other day that was talking about the millions of bats that are getting destroyed from all of these wind farms in Texas and New Mexico. So the bats are coming out of the caves at night and they're just getting shredded to pieces with this big old sonic noise making machine. So, you keep seeing these things, and whether it's on purpose or on accident, which I can't see how any of these things could be accident, you see these specifically designed programs to, I'm going to say terraform, because, you're transforming the earth, which is the terra, into something new. And whatever this something new is, doesn't involve humans. And I think one of the main reasons, another side point on that, for a long time, 20 or 30 years, almost all cities have ordinances where you can't grow food inside the city. So you can't grow fruit trees in your front yard. You can't grow this or that, tomatoes, different things depending on where you live. Like they have different dumb rules, at different places, obviously. But they have these programs of getting rid of people's ability to grow food right in the city, which obviously, if a city's spread out as far as single family homes, there's plenty of room usually within their yards to grow trees, to regulate temperature, to have a small little ecosystem in each one that outputs and helps with the human that's living there. As far as food, like I'm doing here, I have melons on my counter that are not going to be, totally ripe or going bad until early spring. I'm going to still eat a watermelon. You know what I mean? Or, I'm putting these jars back of little things I keep finding. Like the other day, I found a big patch of wasabi lettuce, and it tastes exactly like wasabi. Like I didn't know what it was. I actually thought it was a different species. I'm not even sure how it got there. It came out of like one of the seed packs I planted at some time, and it blew in the yard and found a place that it liked and started growing. So there's this big old patch of this wasabi lettuce for no reason in my yard, because it's the same, terrain as a lot of these other wild lettuces that can still grow in the desert or any place. So you could fill the whole area around you with all of these things. All of them you don't have to eat because, maybe your next door neighbor likes wasabi and you don't like wasabi. Well, they'll be tickled if, funds are low and there's not much food choices, and they make a meal and, they got this little dried up bush that you dried and now it's a powder, a spice, and they can put it on their food. Makes, hard time stretch. And I've noticed another pattern as far as the way that they're shutting down is how people that make meals, like a traditional family meal, some of the ingredients are always going to be gone now. So in our grocery stores locally, they don't have things like saltback or, hog jaw or, the hip, there's different products that are liked in different areas of the country that are usually parts off the pig that are super salted. So you could throw it in a pot of beans or make a stew with it. So they're not selling these type of things. So they know that more than half the population is going to continue to eat these boxed carcinogenic foods. And they're bringing you totally away from the idea or the capability even of growing your own food in the city areas, totally. So you'll be trapped there. You have to eat what they have. the organic food's not exactly organic, but it says it is. And so they're all trapped in that. Meanwhile, the people in the rural areas can just about grow whatever they want because there's no ordinances or stuff. But that's changing, and because of these Agenda 2030 programs that are incorporated in local governments, which is the point where people need to fight and get all of that junk out of their local government, because what that is world governance. And it's an idea called when globalization meets localization. So people in the local area think they have a handle on things and that they're going to be able to do this thing or the other thing. The county government comes along and says, no, actually, because of this program we're doing, and they won't tell you it has any association with Agenda 2030 or any of these other greening programs or fake programs. So all of these programs don't work. They don't make enough electricity, and that's what they're filling up the space. So it's obvious by design catastrophe on purpose. And it makes me wonder, how bad is the magnetic field going to collapse? What kind of scenario are we actually going in? Because we all know that there was Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon and Denisovan and probably 4 or 5 other human species on the planet at one time, but they all just disappeared. And I'm wondering if there's something in the human being that we are that filled up the world this last bit of history that could survive having a collapsed magnetic field, because the other people didn't. Lots of animals didn't. And of course there was the flood and impacts and the end of the Hunger Dryas, but go back 42,000 years ago and all of the other humans disappeared off the planet, and then it left us with only one kind of hybrid, admixture species on the planet. So something in that core species allowed us to survive. I don't believe that, every source of humans on the earth were somebody that hid in a cave. Some of them were, obviously, but what are they afraid of is going to happen this round? If that's, what it looks like is happening. You see the magnetic field collapsing. You see the solar cycle doing something also at the same time. So what does that mean? Is it a greening of the earth, a mutation of species, and the speciation and extinction of all kinds of stuff? That seems to be what they're really hijacking here. That seems to be what the reset is all about. What do you think, David? Do you think there's something inherent in human beings that is made to withstand these kind of cycles? Because we're here. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue that things like this have happened, but we're here right now. So even all the doom and gloom, there are pockets of humans that will always continue to be what we are, the Homo sapien sapien, but the system seems to have another plan. And that's kind of why I say we're like the last generations of Homo sapien sapien.
I would agree. It seems that, like you say, the powers that be, what do they know? What are they fearful of? It's not so much the physical. It's the spiritual awakening of the human psyche, the human mind, the human connection back to source that allows them to see through this veil of reality that's been put upon the entire planet over at least the last 200 years of this control structure of, like I say, industry, magnates of shipping. Everything has to come from centralized delivery systems. You can't do anything on your own anymore. Once that veil lifts on all the corruption involved in that and all the destruction of the earth to get those things when we don't even need 80% of that, because most of it's involved in the refining of metals and also getting energy to be able to get that heat source. Like once this veil lifts, as the sun steps down, the frequency is changing, the vibratory pattern of the sun's changing, the way our magnetic lobes of our brains process information of truly what's in front of you right now. Like look in front of your eyes. As the vibration from the sun changes, what you perceive in front of you, something might come into your field of vision because you're vibrating at a different level. Your mind is processing information differently because the magnetic field around you is different. It's changed. It's stepping down into more of a zero magnetic field state. Where does that bring us on the Yuga cycle? And since we're talking about cycles, I mean, there's many known cycles. We have the Yuga cycles, which are, the Indian version from the Vedic text, the Kali Yuga. We just exited out of that. We're in this phase called the Dwapara Yuga, which every day vibrationally from now becomes lighter and lighter and lighter until we get to the very top of the scale where humanity can manifest instantly with just thought. This is the story where the gods come from, and the Vimana fighting in the sky. Well, that's Tesla Technologies, the anti-gravitics, and like weightless travel using the same magnetic fields spinning against each other that could generate electricity also allows you to take an object and make it weightless. It's that same technology, one bird, two stones. So you would never need to even transport tons of stuff across roads and build special roads for tons of stuff and all these construction things that we did over this last 2 centuries or 1 century. Let's go back to, say, 1820. We had magnets, we had motors, we understood how things spin. Okay, that's the basic principle on it. You were getting vacuum cleaners, they understood. Automobiles were there, they understood batteries and alternators. We would have weightless travel and free energy. Imagine how the world would be very, very different if those two things were in play at 100% for the last 100 years. We would have none of the pollution we have now. We would have none of the overpopulation, quote unquote, problems because of the centralized systems that are creating the problems to make it as this carrying capacity has maxed out based on the current system. But if that system were to change into, like you say, things that are running off the Earth's magnetic field to power them, then the carrying capacity could easily go to 12, 14 billion easily. But again, we're in this cycle. So the known terror button for the current planetary regime holding on was structured during a lower vibration period of humanity's existence on this planet. That's it. And from today, and it was actually in the 1600s when we started to switch over into the different yuga as it transited out into what we know the Dwapara Yuga now. We're actually officially in it. Back in 2019, as the planets came next to each other in the sky to appear as one, I think it was Saturn and Jupiter came together in the great conjunction. That was also a signal, not only in Western astrology, but also in Vedic astrology, that the time had switched. And you see how many cycles there are around the planet. Whoever knew the cycle, they know it's back again. But there's two things in play. The vibrational frequency is going higher every day. So what they structured in a low vibration frequency is not going to work anymore. So it's a moot point anyway, even trying to sustain the same systems, because just in the physical matter around it is going to vibrate in a different way. So it can't even function. But then also, what's the intensity of this cycle is the main question. Because think about hurricane scales. We can go from a tropical storm to a Category 1 hurricane, Category 2, Category 5, Category 5 plus. But what's the intensity of the cycle? Because obviously somebody knows the onset date. Because what we're seeing with right now, the volcanism and the changing jet streams and cloud cells based on electromagnetism, that's the onset. So what's the intensity? Like, how really truly intense is this going to be? Because that's another whole wild card. If it's going to be a super intense cycle, you could see things probably moving faster versus incremental to try to make these changes come in. I'm not sure. But Ransom, you brought the topic up, so I was just trying to get back. But I really think the number one concern for any government on the planet right now is the awakening of humanity in a new vibratory pattern. I think that's what they're terrified of. And they're trying to keep the vibration of humanity down with all this fear across, with all these narratives and events across the planet. Each one gets scarier, scarier, scarier. They're keeping in the fear vibration because your natural vibration would be increasing. So they're trying to offset it by putting the fear in versus having an entire joyous planet with zero fear just rising through this increasing energy phase. I don't know, man. It's good. Maybe I'm just a late night rambler there. Cheers.
No, I had a question for you though, because we're talking about a minute ago the magnetic field kind of waning, at least right now. It's not like it's collapsed, but it's definitely has shrank. That's as far as I understand it. So we go through these little patterns where we go through these debris fields of different cometary or asteroids or whatever, just debris out there, and we, the Hunger Dryas impact theory. Well, it seems like it's more than a theory. It seems to have been proven, in my mind at least, that at the end of the ice age there, we had several impacts, maybe hundreds of impacts all over the place, mostly in the northern hemisphere. And this caused a lot of the ice to melt and the sea, flooding and fires and, all kinds of stuff. And we see all these civilizations that are building, in my mind, megalithic stuff, because that's the time period I think that civilization lived. Then they just stop. And, it takes us a long time to catch up to that point as far as history goes. But, in my mind, I'm thinking, you were talking about magnets earlier. So if the planet that we're on has a strong magnetic field, so it's going to be pushing off, depending on the charge of these incoming debris fields or objects, bouncing them kind of off the magnetic field, kind of like it does with the cosmic rays. But what happens if there is no bubble, so to speak, of this electromagnetic field that protects the Earth? So you have these incoming objects that would normally kind of just bounce off or slightly change in direction. And now they don't have that opposing force. So, when you think about that, that could happen at any time point where we have debris that changes what we think of is the way things are going to work. And obviously at that time, there were some pretty impressive things going on worldwide, and they stopped. They stopped for quite some time. And that gets back to that idea of pockets of humans and different kind of humans. We're kind of in this technological scenario. We're being hit with these technological, I guess you could call them singularities that the elite are now giving to us. And I don't know if you saw this in the news, but San Francisco is now debating whether or not to use robots to deal with things and give them lethal force. And, that kind of goes along the idea of what we're talking about. They're trying to not only reprogram us, but put robots inside of us, make robots run things. And, when I say robots, that includes the AI that they will inevitably giving it over to, which is you could think they're all independent systems, but they're all going to be on this internet system exchanging information. So it's hard to tell me that these algorithms aren't going to be working in unison as one singular kind of consciousness. And then what does that system do? If something like what happened, at the end of the Hunger Dryas, I don't think it can survive that. So it's trying to use us to create a system so that it can survive that. And I think that's what all of these new implementing of controls on society are about. They're trying to get everything neat and tidy for when the circumstances that we're about to come into happen. That's just my opinion. But back to the question, am I right on thinking this, that the magnetic field would, kind of bounce off some of the trajectories of these things that fly by the Earth every so often? And if we didn't have that, how much effect would that have on, impacts? I know there's also inertia that's going to bring it in anyway if it's already in an impact, but it seems like it would just pull these things in there. And then I want you to combine that thought about 2024 on, what was it, December 21st, when you got this weird boxed shape of the solar system with all the magnetic fields in a strangely symmetric place.
And a single quadrant of the solar system. That's the other thing. The feathered serpent returns. And to answer the question, if there was zero magnetic field, theoretically, a grain of sand that would burn up in the upper atmosphere would make it to the ground, provided it was able to skip through the cloud layers. But you got to think about that magnetic field is what's causing the dragging in the atmosphere and causing that to heat up. When it enters our atmosphere, the drag is caused by the magnetic field. and the electrical interaction on that grain of different charged particle coming into a different charge. So tighten up your magnetic fields. And Ransom, Godwin, thank you for joining me tonight for an interesting bit of conversation. Awaken humanity. See you next week. Bye for now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your valuable time.
Thank you for listening to Revolution